Welcome to NieuwRechts, or for our English listeners, NieuwRight. My name is Daniël de Liever, and I'm happy to introduce Werner Patzelt to our interview today. Thank you for joining us.
Well, it's a pleasure being with you.
Thank you. It is interesting to have you on, especially now in a time where a lot of things are changing in the world. You have a big and long academic career with many interests, for example, in micro-sociological issues. And we also see that you have a lot of experience when it comes to comparing different ways of governing. I think nowadays these are very relevant. But before we go into depth of what you have done, I'm curious to know, why did you start your career in academics? What drove you?
I have always had the feeling that the thing I really want to do in my life is to explore things that have not yet been explored sufficiently, to go new intellectual ways, to teach young students, and to live in an academic environment. Frankly, this was before the time when political correctness played such an important role in academia. I always wanted to be without the boss and simply following my own ideas. Fortunately, during most of my academic career, I could do exactly this. And so I never considered any serious alternative to being an academic.
It's great. And it's also good that you point out the political correctness. I guess there are a lot of issues nowadays that you can or cannot talk about. But if you take away this political correctness, what kind of issues are very interesting or important to you at the moment?
Well, I would say three things are the most important ones for the moment. The first one is the evolution of the European system of government in a changing historical period when institutionalization, as we have done it so far, has come to a certain dead end. So the development, the evolution of the European political system, this is one important issue. The second thing, which is so interesting right now, is a kind of alienation of the population of Western democracies from their political classes, from their ruling elites, which expresses and transforms itself into the rise of what we call populism. And the third issue, what I'm now working on a full volume history of, is the history of parliamentarianism from very old times to the present times, because looking at the history of parliamentarianism, you can get a very clear understanding of how organizing political systems might work better or worse.
Those are, I guess, a lot of big topics that interest you, I guess.
Vergeet de NOS en de NPO. Het is tijd voor NieuwRechts, de nieuwswebsite voor rechtsdenkend Nederland.
I guess for your field of interest, it's a very interesting times, to say the least. I think let's unwrap what you're talking about. Let's just look at the European situation. Like we see, like you said, the transformation. We see like that a lot of right-wing populist parties are rising. In my own home country, you see the PVV of Geert Wilders. Of course, you have AfD in Germany, RN in France. You have in Austria, FPÖ, and many more. Why do you think that we see such populist and right-wing parties that on the rise in Europe?
I guess there are at least two reasons, interconnected, of course. One reason is that policies which have been successful in the past, like being open to immigration, like transferring ever more authority to the European political system, that such policies have come into the area of declining marginal use. Ever more Europeanization will not contribute significantly to the welfare of the European states. Having ever more immigration will not contribute significantly, if not doing harm, to the economic situation and the social situation in the European countries. And so many people in Europe feel that established policies, driven more and more by ideological reasons and not by rational reasons, that ever more of these policies have come into the field of being less productive than they've been in the past. The second reason seems to be that in politics and in academia and among journalists, we have more and more some kind of a arrogant, patronizing class of persons who are detached from how ordinary people think, who follow their own ideological rationale, and who are not willing to listen to the concerns of people. And therefore, many people react to this arrogant political and academic class in a hostile reaction, which finds its expression in the rising forms of right-wing populism.
And do you think, because I think one of the main criticisms from, I would say, the established political system is that these parties are extreme right, that they're anti-democratic. Is there justification to this rise, or is it bigotry from ordinary people, in your opinion?
We have observed several times in history that those who are in power consider all kinds of opposition to their own capacities to shape policy making, that they consider all forms of opposition as illegal, unfair, illegitimate. And this is one of the reasons why the ruling leftists, woke, green, elites in politics, journalism, academia, and so on, consider opposing political movements as anti-democratic, dangerous for the further well-being of the political communities. And I think that only to a certain degree they have right in this perception of the situation. See, among those who are treated as bad right-wing populists, there are many who really are not right-wing, who never left a political position of the political center. But the whole political atmosphere, the whole political climate has shifted to the left or to the woke side of the political spectrum during the last years. And so they feel treated in an unfair and unjustified way, and therefore they revolt even emotionally against the, so to speak, ruling class in our political and cultural situation. So they give some reason for treating them as not, well, normal political rivals, but as anti-democratic, too emotional, and so on. But to a large extent, this is simply a reaction to an arrogant behavior of established political elites. And so we are in the unhappy situation that we have kind of a spiral of escalation on both sides, with lacking goodwill on both sides. If our elites would be more willing than they are to listen to the concerns of ordinary people, then so many of those people would not appreciate, well, polemics and demagogical utterances from their own leaders. So it's a bad situation in which we have brought ourselves, and maybe one day we will find an exit from this situation.
So basically you're saying that the ruling class is not taking its responsibility, and therefore Europe is polarizing. But then you say that most of the criticism is maybe unfounded, but you could say that when more extreme ideas are increasingly normalized, then where is the boundary, of course, where things do in turn become anti-democratic? So the question I would have is, how can we make this distinction as we are not out of the situation, at least for the foreseeable future?
One of the problems is that our use of political concepts is not clear enough. See, many people nowadays used to call extremism what really is nothing more than radicalism. And radicalism means nothing but carrying a political idea or carrying an argument, well, as far as possible until it may get even absurd or no longer compatible with other arguments. Extremism, however, at least in the German political setting, is defined as active battle, active fighting against a liberal democratic political order. So it is an active fight against established democracy. But being a radical person is part of using or making use of political freedom, making use of liberty as is guaranteed by liberal democratic order. So due to our lack of distinction between radicalism and extremism, so many people today treat radicals who use the right of thinking things to the last consequence, treat them as extremists. And this poisons our political discourse, and this creates the German situation where many people think that the best way of dealing with political opponents is to have the Federal Constitutional Court forbid their existence and thus get rid of political opponents. The best thing to deal with, or the best way to deal with radicals, is to discuss with them. And since in the past, so many of our established politicians, academics, and so on, did not want really to discuss, to enter discussions and public debates with radicals or with populists, they simply left open space for them to radicalize and to enjoy themselves in their sometimes really demagogical views. So we did so many things in the wrong way throughout Europe, and we need to stop our wrong dealing with the consequences of justified political pluralism.
And where do you think we went wrong? How did we get to this point where the political class is now so afraid of other opinions and that they're trying to shut their opinions down and frame them as like extremism?
I can tell it quite precisely in the German case. Things went wrong when in my city of Dresden, the Pegida demonstration started. Pegida meaning patriotic Europeans against the Islamization of the Occident. At this point in time, and we are back in 2014, before the big immigration wave, the established politicians said, well, those who have some concern with growing immigration, in particular from Islamic countries to Germany, they simply are racist. They do not have sound reasons for being concerned about this immigration. And as racists, they are fascists, and we will not discuss with or engage in discussions with fascists because we can't treat such people like being, well, legitimate political opponents. And when later in Germany, the AfD, Alternative for Germany, simply went on the path opened by the Pegida demonstrations, this pattern of behavior was extended to AfD. So we never have had any serious discussions between AfD members and the rest of the political class. We always have had discussions about or on or against AfD. And therefore, our political communication suffered from a huge split between those who say, well, whatever is in existence is justified being in existence. There is no alternative to our ways of thinking, our ways of policy making. And those others who said, well, we need to stop certain things because they lead us into the wrong direction. In Germany, it was exactly in the early years of 2010, 11, 12, 13, 14, when this attitude towards right-wing or towards non-centrist opposition to established policy making started. And the results can be seen right now, where it is increasingly impossible to form governments because a significant part of the population of the voters will not be included in coalitions, and therefore counter-natural, so to speak, counter-natural coalitions need to be formed between centrists of the Christian Democratic Union and leftists, which will not please most of those voters who have voted for AfD.
Do you think, if we talk specifically about the German case, of course, I think what complicates it, that Germany is, in a sense, still living in the shadow of World War II. So there are many comparisons made, of course, but like, especially when you talk about the right-wing extreme party, which is how AfD is being framed, as we talked about before. Is there any substance? Is there any danger to AfD specifically in the German case, or are they, like you said before, more on the radical side than on the extreme side?
First of all, it is quite obvious that Germany is still living in the shadow of the Nazi period. And the main reason is not that Nazism would still prevail in Germany and would be in need of being attacked. But the main reason is that the Federal Republic of Germany understands itself as the alternative, or to put it more precisely, as the opposite to Nazi rule. Therefore, everything which in political discussions can be put in a context of Nazism and fascism is something which needs to be, to be treated very carefully, very emotionally, such as if the existence of democratic Germany would be jeopardized by it. And therefore, we have some kind of a neurotic reaction to all kinds of right-wing political parties, right-wing political extremism. As far as I can see, right-wing extremism does not pose any serious danger for the stability of German democracy, nor does right-wing populism. The main problem are the hysterical reactions to AfD and to those who join behind the AfD, with a bit more of rationality and goodwill on part of those who correctly and legitimately defend our political order, with a bit more of rational behavior on their part, a bit more of strategical behavior, and not only tactical opportunism, we would be in a much better situation than we are.
I think that's a fair point. Then I guess many people now are hoping that AfD can actually make a difference, that they can form coalitions, maybe with more centric parties. We see, of course, in local elections lately, they're doing very well. They're either winning, becoming or getting second. Do you think that AfD has the ability to actually make some changes in the direction that Germany is going in?
In a first step, one needs simply to take into notice that AfD has already changed German politics. Due to the rise of AfD at the European election, at the state elections in 3 of the East German states, as a reaction to that, the Social Democratic Party, the Green Party have changed their attitudes towards immigration. And the Christian Democrats, who have suffered most from the rise of AfD, have already for 1 or 2 years changed their position on migration. AfD has already changed something, and this shows that and how democracy works. If established politicians are no longer covering the political preferences of the voters, they are forced either to lose power or to accept losing power, or they have to readjust their own policies. The second dimension in which the existence of AfD has changed German politics is that it is, for the time being, impossible for any political party to engage or to enter in a coalition with the AfD. The Christian Democratic Union has categorically excluded this possibility. And of course, neither the Social Democrats nor the Greens will ever think about entering a coalition government with the AfD. And on part of the AfD, some serious miscalculations need to be given up, or need to be given up before the AfD even can prepare itself for entering a coalition government. So far, the AfD has felt to be, the alternative to everything which is current in the German political system, established political parties, established policies. AfD wanted to be an absolute alternative, a fundamental opposition. And of course, they did not like to enter coalitions with the Christian Democrats. They felt themselves to be the follow-up party of the Christian Democrats, which will lose their existence due to the rise of AfD. And if you have on the other side a party with this attitude towards yourself as Christian Democratic Union, of course, it is something close to inconceivable to say, now let's try to prepare a coalition with them. Maybe one day, in 4 years and 5 years from now, the AfD will have changed its attitude towards the other political parties, and the Christian Democratic Union will have as well. And the journalists in Germany might have seen that it is a big disadvantage for the German political system if a significant part of the voters is excluded from parliamentary representation or for representation in coalition governments. Maybe that then we get a healthier situation. For the time being, we need to see that we have a right-wing majority in Germany, and this right-wing majority is never given a center-right government in Germany, but always confronted with a center-left government. And this, of course, will contribute to a further rise of AfD and right-wing forces.
What do you think AfD would have to give up to make it more reasonable in the future for them to be considered for a coalition?
Can you repeat the question? I did not get it.
Yeah, so you said that AfD will need to give up some things to be able to be taken seriously as a coalition party. So what kind of things should people think of that AfD should give up so that they can work together, for example, with CDU?
There are two issues or two dimensions in which AfD would need to change. First of all, in the AfD, a certain preference for demagogical expressions, for a verbal radicalism has emerged during the last years, which does not really resonate with those who consider politics to be a serious business where you need to talk in a serious and rational way about issues to be solved. The second issue is some of the political positions of the AfD, if meant seriously, need to be given up. For instance, claiming for a remigration of hundreds of thousands of people in Germany, or they need to be framed in a more rational language. So here the AfD itself, imprisons itself in certain, with preferences for radical language. And the third element is certain persons from the AfD are not, compatible with those persons the other political parties might accept. For instance, Björn Höcke, the party chairman of Thuringia, is somebody with whom nobody amongst the leaders of the Christian Democratic Union would ever cooperate. Therefore, you need to present a political leadership personnel which is compatible and trustworthy for possible coalition partners. Rhetorics, political positions, and political personnel. Those are the three issues where the AfD has to work on, or to put it more bluntly, to readjust.
That is interesting, because you would say that politics indeed is a serious matter, and it should be a lot more about the content, and maybe less only about the rhetoric. But from what you're saying and what we see, I guess, in Europe, it's increasingly been about rhetoric more than actually about the content of what we can do to maybe change the position of Europe for the better.
This is absolutely true. And the main reason for this sad state of affairs is that the political class has conducted those policies which have brought us into some political problems like migration, energy politics, lack of sound security politics in the past, that the political class would need to admit that they have been politically wrong for so long a period of time before they could seriously talk about political contents. And therefore, for the political class, it is much more easy to talk about political style than on political substance, because they were wrong on substance and maybe they were better on style.
That's, I guess, a fair description. Let's look a little bit more about Europe. Would you consider, with all the things that we have discussed so far, that we are in a political crisis in Europe?
If we define crisis as a stage where decisions are taken, whether you will move in a good direction or in a bad direction, then we really can say we are in the time of crisis. Personally, I would prefer to talk about a time of changes. See, the political situation of Europe has deeply changed. A couple of decades ago, Europe was ruling the world. Britannia was ruling the seas. And then came the self-destruction of Europe in the First and Second World War. Then Europe could be, so to speak, satisfied with being a close ally to the United States, which have been a consequence of European intellectual hegemony and intellectual imperialism in the past. But those times are coming to an end with the rise of China. We have the collapse of Western authority. You see it in the discourses on human rights. You see it in the discourses about whether democracy would be the best possible form of government, which most people in Russia, in China, and in other parts of the world would deny. We have lost our hegemonial character, or our power, our potential for exerting power in the world. And this changes everything for Europe. See, our policies of sanctions against China and Russia, European politicians meant that if they make sanctions against Russia, Russia will stop warfare. If Europe would would get heavy interest on Chinese products, Chinese would simply stop publicly funding their industries. Nothing of this is happening because we no longer have the important power in the world, and this earlier European power will not come back. And strengthening simply the institutional framework of the EU will not do the trick. You can have a commissioner for European security policies or military policies, but we will not have the military power. We will not have the young persons who are needed for power projection all around the world. So we have, as Europeans, adjust to our new situation in the world. And third element, we have to accept that the path entered in the past towards an ever closer union, having something like United States of Europe, will not do the trick either. If we weaken our national states, we really weaken the potential for making Europe strong and, to paraphrase Donald Trump, and making Europe great again. Strengthening the Brussels system of government will not make our democracies, our national economies more vivid, more efficient than they have been in the past, that the whole path of the European integration needs to be reconsidered, and we need to think about more nationalization of policies and about less centralization. But at present, nobody knows in which direction the pendulum will swing in the future. We should contribute our part by making the pendulum swing in the proper direction, at least as we see it, by entering the arena of public discourse on European issues.
Do you think that in this time, a lot of people, I think, are feeling that the role of Europe is changing or already changed drastically, and people are feeling, some feel uneasy with it, some feel despair. I think this is also a part of people are looking for change because they don't like the direction that Europe is going in the world politics. What can we do in Europe to, of course, not go back to old times where we are dominating a lot of the discourse in the world, but what can we do to create a stronger Europe where people can be hopeful that there's a good future for them and also for their future generations?
As a preliminary remark, I would like to say that maybe we will have no chance to make Europe strong again, because some changes are irreversible. If we lose our economic capacities for competing successfully with other nations, then we are in an inferior position from which we will not recover, like so many cities in Europe who have had their high times in the medieval ages and never could recover from their decline, like the cities of Pisa and so on. Maybe this is what will happen with Europe. But after having brought forward this rather skeptical view, I would stress three issues. First of all, Europeans should get aware of the problematic situation. It is no longer to be taken for granted that European values are universal, will be shared by everybody in the world, and that we have the power to enforce our values by imposing sanctions on others. We simply have to get aware of the situation. Second element, we need to protect and to reproduce the resources for European strength. And among these resources is a certain pride of European culture. We should not fight our past. We should be proud of our past, at least of most parts of the European past. And we should enter these things into our educational processes. We should convey the ideas, the European ideas of liberty, of active citizenship, and so on, into our educational system, such that young Europeans do not need to look, say, for Islamic culture to find a good vision of a good way to organize one's own way. So we need to reproduce those resources which have made us strong in the past. And third, we need to reform our educational systems. We need to reposition them. We need more discipline, more knowledge conveyed to the next situation, more willingness to try hard and to work hard, and less ambition for having a good work-life balance, but based on a good work-life balance, you can consume those things you have inherited from the past, but you will not be able to reproduce them. And if this would go along, maybe as a fourth element, with a vision of what Europe should be in the future, then it might be helpful. For the time being, I would say, or I would predict the European future of being an open-air museum of a once glorious culture. An open-air museum, just like we go to Egypt and look at the remains from pharaonic Egypt, never connecting the present Egyptian people with those people who created this high culture. This would not be a good future for Europe, to be an open-air museum for people coming from Asia or other parts of the world. We should revitalize our Europe by the three steps I've talked about before. Getting aware of the crisis and accepting that we have to react to this crisis. We have to reproduce the resources which made us great in the past. And we have to reinvigorate our educational system, because without, good, willing, and skilled Europeans, we will never make Europe great again.
I think you hit here a very, very crucial point. We see now, as there are many political and cultural systems that are challenging the European ones, that a lot of people, especially young people that are demoralized, feel like either influenced by, let's say, woke post-colonialism, that there is no merit to the European history and culture, that it's only dark. What would you say to people that feel like in the challenges of the European system, that maybe we should adopt a different system and just forget about what Europe once was?
If we look at alternatives, they are not so inviting as they seem to people who do not really look to the alternatives. In a Chinese system, we can relate, or we can try to rely on the goodwill of a political system which tries to create and to stabilize harmony. But in the Chinese system of good harmony provided by political leaders, in earlier times the Chinese emperors, nowadays Chinese Communist Party, in such a system you're a subject, you're not a citizen. And being a citizen, a free person taking active part in one's political community, this is the European vision, and why should we give up this vision? If you look at authoritarian regimes like the Russian one, you are reduced to the status of a subject as well, depending on the goodwill of a political leader. Of course, authoritarian leaders can make big differences. They can initiate big transformations. But is a transformation of Tsarist Russia into Stalin's Russia really something which has made hundreds of thousands of people really happy? Presumably not. So the European way of having revolutions and transformations at much less costs seems to be much better. And if you look at other alternatives like the South American ones, where they've tried it with top-down populism, left-wing populism, this has not contributed to stable political systems. If we take all in all our historical legacies and the lessons from history, our European way of organizing society, economy, politics has been better than all the alternatives we know of. And therefore, we should stick to our historical heritage and not try experimentation with other ideas which neither in Europe ever have been successful, nor in their own countries.
I think even though we might put more trust in the European system, we are still, of course, challenged, especially with a lot of geopolitical conflicts around the world. So what can Europeans do to interact with these different systems? Because even if we would remain our own system, increasingly we need to have maybe a different relation with these different countries with their different systems.
See, Europeans, due to Europe's history from the 16th century to the early 20th century, European history has been marked with the idea that we are the teachers of the rest of the world. We have what the French call une mission civilisatrice, or as the English have put it, we need to bear the white man's burden. We need to civilize the world. Well, to a certain degree, we have brought civilization to other parts of the world, no doubt about that. But now we have to accept that Europe's power base, to put it more precisely, has been lost, is no longer available. We need to be a partner of others, and we are no longer in a position to impose our own way of living, our own preferences to others. And therefore, we need to abandon a policy approach which has been working or tried to be made working on the basis that we are the superiors. We are no longer the superiors. We have to accept a role of equal partners, but we must make sure that we will not be dominated by others. For instance, Chinese imperialism must not be allowed to take over a hegemonial situation or a hegemonial position in Europe, not in economics due to the road in initiative by the Chinese government, nor by military ambitions of the Chinese government to prevent Western navies from passing through the Taiwan Strait or something like that. We need to protect our status in the world, but we should give up the idea that we can impose our standards due to a superior position of Europe onto others.
I think it's interesting, especially that you mentioned China, because of course, as Europe, as you already mentioned, we've been very reliant on the United States. But we see now that some countries, like for example Hungary, are switching some of their emphasis more towards ties with China. What is your take on this switching allegiance maybe from the United States to other parts of the world?
The United States are to put it in a metaphorical way, the most important son or daughter, however you want to put it, that Europe has created in the world. The United States still, and for many, many decades in the future, is another form of European culture, of course, shaped by different circumstances. But nothing in the world is closer to our European ideas than the United States. Neither African nations, neither China nor Russia. Therefore, this is an asset which we need to protect and to draw most benefit of it. If the United States, due to the challenge by new Chinese hegemonialism, is looking towards Eastern Asia, well, then this is the case. Then we have to accept that we Europeans need again to assume responsibility for our part of the world, which is Europe. One of the shortcomings, of the faults, of the wrong decisions of Europe in the past decades has been to outsource, so to speak, the security of European nations to the United States and not invest in European defense, in European military strength. We need to strengthen our position in the world. We need to do so as far as it is possible in a close alliance with the United States. But we need to reassume responsibility for our destiny in Europe ourselves.
Great. I have one final question. You see also now that other countries are forming alliances, like, for example, BRICS, that is happening at the moment. Do you think that when we can rely less on the United States, that there will be a need for European countries to also form maybe a different alliance, for example, with India, when the United States shifts maybe a lot of their attention more towards fighting China in this geopolitical war?
To argue with a look at India, if India is a political system, a political community, sharing our democratic values, accepting our special European interests, well, fine, then let's enter into an alliance with India. And if India will not draw us into a deep conflict with China, then no problem with an alliance with India. But the old idea that we will be the champion in such a relationship and the others will be, so to speak, the followers of our own ideas, this should be given up. And if you think in those terms, even in the case of India about an alliance, not making any reference to making alliance with China or Russia, then you see that this is, in the best case, the second best solution. We Europeans need to say, well, we are one of the strongest economic parts of the world. We are culturally one of the best parts of the world. And we have had control over the world for centuries. Why not trying to make really, to repeat myself, Europe great again? Not as a dominator of the world, nor as a competitor of China or the United States, but as what the Spanish people call poderes fácticos. We are simply there, powers who need to be taken into account, who cannot be ignored, who have to be respected because they are so strong. This combination of new humility with ongoing strength and self-assurance would be the best way, instead of bringing Europe into alliances different from the one with the United States, because, to repeat myself again, the United States are flesh from European flesh, blood from European blood. Of course, in under the circumstances, but we are so close to each other, and we are never so close, we will never be so close with countries like India or China.
Thank you very much for this very insightful interview and for your time. And also thanks to the listeners and viewers of this interview. If you want to read more or support us, you can visit us at our social media or on our website. And maybe if people want to read more of your work, because of course you have published many articles, books, etc., where could they find more if they want to read about your vision of the world?
It's no problem to go to my webpage, which is WJ Patzelt, my name. From every computer, you can access my website, and there you find usually an actual list of my publications.
Thank you very much, and see you maybe in a new episode.